Welcome to the FinLink FinCast, where we talk about everything wealth management, especially as it pertains to M&A. Here is your host, Xander Heinen.
Hello, welcome to the FinLink FinCast, where we talk about everything wealth management, especially as it pertains to M&A. I have a really special guest here today, Jack Devine. He's the founder and chairman of the Arkin Group, also known as TAG, which is a global risk and strategic intelligence consultancy serving multinational financial institutions, global law firms, Fortune 100 companies, and family offices. FinLink has partnered with Jack and TAG to offer our members access to TAG intelligence, namely with his 3+1 newsletter, which offers weekly updates on a variety of topics throughout the world as they pertain to geopolitical risk and current events. Jack, thanks so much for popping on today.
It's a pleasure, for sure.
So I have the opportunity now to tell everyone of your bio, and it's probably one of the most interesting bios I've ever read. So bear with me here. But Jack Devine, founder and chairman of the Arkin Group. He's a 32-year veteran of the Central Intelligence Agency, where he served as both acting director and associate director of the CIA's operations outside the United States, as well as chief of the Latin American division, the head of the CIA's Counter Narcotics Center, and the head of the CIA's Afghan Task Force. He was awarded with the CIA's Meritorious Officer Award for this accomplishment and is the recipient of the agency's Distinguished Intelligence Medal and several meritorious awards. Jack has written widely on intelligence, including his two books, Spy Master's Prism, The Fight Against Russian Aggression and Good Hunting, and American Spy Master's Story, along with op-ed articles for the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the Financial Times. He has also made guest appearances on CBS, NBC, MSNBC, Fox News, and Bloomberg News, and is frequently called upon to share his opinion on a myriad of geopolitical events. Jack is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Did I miss anything there, Jack?
Note two, let me make a couple of points. One, I'm able to write a book because in the spy business, you can be on the action side or the espionage. You can be James Bond or George Smiley, if those that read spy novels, right? So I ended up doing both, but I hit more covert action than most people, and it all became public. So once it's public, I still have to have it approved by the agency. So I was able to address it. But you mentioned a couple of things that are covert action. One was, it is true, I was head of the Counter Narcotics Center, but what people might like to know is I was in charge of it when Pablo Escobar, the well-known drug dealer, met his demise, right? So I go into that at some deal. And then you mentioned the program as chief of the Afghan Task Force, but it was the Cold War type of task force. That was the famous movie that still plays on Netflix. It's one of the top shows still. By the way, it's not true, but it's Charlie Wilson's War, how he single-handedly drove the Russians out of Afghanistan. But I was in charge of the real program, and I knew Charlie well. I traveled with him. So I think you hit all the right notes, but behind each of them, there's a story. Well, I've written to it, and your guests can read about it. But I think I've learned a great deal as a result of that and have strong views, which I hope emerge in our discussion. But you did a really nice job queuing it up.
Thank you. Yeah, you were around, with the Mujahideen and all those things that have kind of changed over the decades, and now we're sitting at the place where we are today. And we'll kind of go into what's happening in the world right now, especially since last Friday with Israel and Iran. But I wanted to get quickly, just I don't speak with many former CIA intel officers, probably 2 or 3 in my life that I know of. I promise I won't ask about anything, as it relates to Project Paperclip or MK Ultra or any of the other things you're hearing around in the other podcasts. But I did want to just see how you started in the CIA. You mentioned when you were younger, you were a lifeguard. Would love to hear a little bit about your younger years and how you got into position you were in for 32 years.
There's the movie and then there's reality. Maybe later on we'll talk about my discussion with Sean Connery about the difference. All you have to do is look at our pictures and decide maybe there's the disconnect between Hollywood and ourselves. But it was a really interesting discussion. And for years I went around saying, "Oh, this is such trivial stuff. It trivializes the real work." And then I sat down one day, and looked in the mirror, and said, "Wait a minute, wait a minute. They think this guy, James Bond, never makes a mistake, right? Single-handedly saves the Queen and the Empire, right? And is omnipotent. Why are you going around saying, no, I work for the government. I'm just another bureaucrat, right? So I've gotten away from that because immediately people, they put on their sleeping glasses for flying on airplanes when they hear me start talking about just government programs. But I did have a lot of exciting things. But I ended up in the CIA as a bit of mystery to everybody, including myself at times. I'm a Philadelphia guy. I eventually, after years living in Washington and 7 countries abroad, I was chief in 5 of them. But I've spent half my adult career, a professional career in the CIA abroad. But when I came back, I bought a house in Ocean City, New Jersey, for those that are from that area, because I was a lifeguard in North Wildwood, just south of there, as a young kid. And I never got the sand out of between my toes. I think it's a great experience for a young person being on the beach as a lifeguard. And they were in innocent days. I can't imagine today what it must be like. But it actually was, one of the things that's interesting, at a very young age, I was 16. You make a call on someone's life or death. You see them in the water. All day you're looking at the sky. You're not allowed to look at beautiful women should they pass by. You're not allowed to talk to them and so on. But you have to be alert. You have to make a decision, a split decision on whether to go or not. And then you go and rescue someone. And you're part of a team and you have a mission, right? So I didn't even realize any of this. I just thought I was getting a lot of vitamin D, and now I'm paying for it, as we talked about. I can see, but back then I didn't realize how important that is in certain jobs. A policeman, a soldier. There's no time to think great thoughts and pontificate on certain occasions. So as a lifeguard, and I went to Westchester State. It's now Westchester University in Villanova. So and after I did my graduate work in Villanova, and I probably thought I was going to be a professor. Now, that would not have worked out, particularly today. I won't go into it, but I would not have I'm not sure how much of a professor, but I did teach school in suburban Philadelphia for about 4 or 5 years, which was, again, if you can talk to, 16-year-old kids and keep their attention, you can certainly brief the Senate of the United States. So they were a learning experience. But I had no one, you see the movies, you went to Yale and the professor taps you on the shoulder and you got a silver spoon in your mouth and speak 6 languages. I'm a blue collar guy, and what happened, my wife gave me a book, and it was called The Invisible Government by David Wise. And it was a scandalous book about the CIA. Today it'd be a cream puff, but back then, how the CIA overthrew the Shah of Iran, if we want, installed the Shah of Iran, right? And how they overthrew this and the Bay of Pigs and all of this. And I read it and said, well, that's fascinating. I didn't know there was a whole other world of policy, and I'm studying about international relations, but I don't have visibility. So my wife said, why don't you write them a letter? So I did. Dear CIA, put it in an envelope. Dear CIA. Then I got invited down to 12th and Chestnut, 3 knocks on the door, and I met this guy. And he looked like a spy should look. He had those days wingtip shoes, the wool jacket with the pad on the end, and he even had a pipe, which was Alan Dulles, the first head smoked a pipe when people did hair stick. I thought, wow, this is a real spy. And they moved me on into another set of interviews and testing. And then I ended up in the jungles of Latin America and paramilitary things and jumping out of planes, all this stuff. But my extent of foreigner experience was what I learned in school. And then I went with the Boy Scouts to Canada and on our honeymoon to Bermuda. So I was a misfit. When I pulled up with my Volkswagen Beetle, with one door painted, a gray one, but a black door painted. And the guy pulled in with the Porsche, whose father owned an oil company, and he'd gone to Yale. I thought, well, I got some makeup work here to do. Just one last thing. I know this rambles on, but so years later, I remember about 7, 8 years ago, the agency asked me to do a verbal history about different things I did. And they said, "Oh, we have a treat for you." So, hey, what's the treat? You usually don't get treats from the CIA, I'll tell you. They said, "Here's your original letter." And I read it and I thought, I didn't say this. Why would you hire this guy? I mean, this is not poetry. What could there possibly be in this handwritten note? And then I thought, well, I must have really knocked out of the park the interview. So I read the interview and it says, not a bad guy. Now let's move them on a little further. But it wasn't like, they were frothing at the mouth because I was such talent. But having said that, I belong there. That's my personal view. I did very well. I ended up, as I said, running big programs and running all of the spies worldwide. And I felt there's
Wow.
something in my DNA. And I think there was something that you can't see that fit really, really well. This is not good, bad, or indifferent. I'm just saying I probably would have made a lousy plumber. My father was in that industry, and I probably would have made a terrible engineer, and maybe passable professor, but I did fit in. So they may disagree, but they're responsible for promoting me along the way. So I hope that puts the setting and that, where my real roots are from.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's a great little background, and I definitely, I was a camp counselor for a long time, and believe it or not, that taught me more than you'd think in life about leadership. And I know they're just crazy little kids at that point, but boy, did it teach me how to do some things along the way. So
Before
now,
before before being
uh,
the life affecting lifeguard, I was in the Boy Scouts. I got to be
yeah,
life scout. I didn't stick to the Eagle. I have two Eagle grandsons. But I'm like you. I think that was extremely formative and helping me. And it's interesting. I found later the later Secretary of Defense, a former director of CIA, was on the board of the Boy Scouts of America. So there's
really,
sometimes when I'm reading a resume, if you tell me you're an Eagle Scout, and I wasn't in the Marines, right, or the military, although I went through their basic training, but there's a couple of things. You get a Marine and you get a Boy Scout and a lifeguard, more esoteric. You've got something to work with. Someone
yeah,
says they're an Eagle Scout. That means a lot to me I get the job done, which is the
yeah,
core slogan of the CIA. You say, well, what is the most common phrase? Can do, can
yeah.
do. And so there's these things in life that you don't think about. You're just having fun, and then you apply them later, and they seem to be much more relevant. So camp, I can remember Del Mar Camp.
Yeah, I was. I think I made it up to Weeblo and the Boy Scouts. So.
Someone told me about you. I didn't say you were going to be on my resume review list. I had one guy, fabulous guy, absolutely terrific, but he had juggler down on there. And I thought, well, I don't know about this. And I'm not knocking jugglers. Now, we've had some
I guess
senior
he
people at
stuck
CIA
to it.
that are magicians, and that might come in handy too. But we'll talk about that at another moment.
So that's a great backstory. And then you did 32 years at the CIA. What prompted the genesis of the Arkin group? And I know you've had a kind of a crossover into the financial world and now wealth management world. So what really precipitated you starting that
I had a
organization?
tremendous amount of international experience. A couple of the jobs brought me to almost every country in the world. One was the counter narcotics, the other was, believe it or not, the Afghan program, because I bought most of the weapons, which were quite substantial to support 120,000 fighters. So I was in Egypt and I was in Pakistan and buying weapons in Europe and types. I mean, it was all over the place. But counter narcotics, when I got there, was everywhere. And once I visited Russia, we can save that for another, another discussion. So I had a lot of international interest, and people don't realize this. They confuse CIA and the FBI about their mission in the United States. The United States is a very limited mission in the United States. It's not looking after Americans as looking at foreigners that are here in official capacities that may be spies. So it's a rather limited initiative. But in the middle, which we didn't get into, there are two things that are in the book as well. I was in Chile when Salvador Allende was over, and that was a president back in the early 70s, and it became quite controversial. I don't want to go into that long history. Another one that's well known was the Iran-Contra affair, when the Reagan administration sold or traded missiles for hostages, and I participated in it, but I'm on record saying it was a bad idea. You know, a bad idea. It was a bad idea, and but in the end, I did well as a result of it. But there was a part of it that was illegal, and again, I had no part with it. It was a very small number of people that decided they were true believers. They believed Central America defending the freedoms down in Nicaragua, that they could work with the Contras, and then they ended up. The money that I was getting for the missiles, which I didn't know, was shifted off to Central America. And that became a crime. Almost brought down the Reagan administration. People have very little memory of that, Ollie North and all of that. Yep. But, coming to your question, one of the principles of this effort was the head of the counter, the Central American Task Force. So he was prosecuted. So the director of the time, Bill Casey, called a lawyer in New York named Stanley Arkin, who became my partner for almost 20 years. One of the top, I have to correct myself, I'm going to say one of the top criminal defense lawyers in the country. He would correct me if we were on this together. He passed away a couple of years ago. He would say, I'm not one of the best. I am the best. So he was a man of great humility, but he had the talent behind it. But he defended and our officer as pro bono, and I remember him quite well. And I thought, well, if I ever get in trouble, I want to hold on to the Stanley Arkin's phone number, right? So the world is so small. When I left the agency, the former acting head of the FBI was working for a company. He said, Jack, there's a job open up here. You ought to come up and, take a look at it. So I thought, well, I didn't know what I was going to do exactly. It was before the terrorism. So CIA spies were not in high demand. Today, they're in much greater demand. But in the course of the first year up there, I ran into Stanley and ran a case for another firm with him. And then he said, let's have lunch. So I said, sure, Stanley, we'll have lunch. He said, your company's so cheap they don't buy lunch. And I said, I'll pay for it. We'll have lunch. And he was significantly wealthy. He didn't need a lunch. Before he sat down at lunch, I ran a case with him, a really, really interesting case. And we'll leave it aside, but it involved folios, manuscripts from the 1500s in a museum. It was a fascinating case. Before he sat down, he said, Jack, I think we should go in business together. I said, well, Stanley, why don't we get to meet each other a little bit? Let's talk about what it may mean. And lo and behold, within 2 weeks, we formed a company. It was to support the law firm. It was because he felt that you really needed a higher quality of intelligence in the legal business, and his clients, law firms, corporations, really needed the benefit of what he had rubbed up against with CIA. So I began to develop with him, an intelligence network worldwide. And then what you're really looking at here is a very small step from the public sector to the private sector. In other words, I got into the information business, and many of the skills that I learned, not how to write secret writing papers and take pictures and behind trees and all this, but how do you deal with, asset managers, and how do you look at their issues, and how do you, win them over to your projects? I mean, things that I had to do with the Congress and the Hill, and how do you build networks? I didn't walk out with CIA people. They should throw anybody in jail that does that. But I know how to do it. So I started out with what I would call FBI and CIA people that worked abroad, and I found out they were middlemen. Many of them had not touched an operation in years. And then I started to deal directly with foreign nationals. So now I'm in touch with virtually in every country with former intelligence people who have networks of their own that do take assets when they leave. And I built up a really robust, exquisite network off of a boutique firm in New York where we do really deep intelligence collection and helping people understand this crazy geopolitical world we're in, but also on the battlefield. You're a company, you're going into a country, you want to know what that country's going to do against your enterprise, what your adversaries are doing. Is your IT system being hacked? I mean, there's so many things that happen abroad that don't happen in the United States. I mean, obviously we're hacked by the Russians, the Chinese, the Koreans. But what I'm saying is most business do not have to face the same types of challenges, and information is really hard to come by, as opposed to the United States, where a lot of it's on the public record. There's rules and regulations, and behavior changes. There's a behavior, I dislike saying this, but we always look at the world as being terribly corrupt. But I've been disappointed over the past 20 years how many of our corporations have a double standard, and people have a double standard of how they operate at home and abroad. And many times I get in a fight, I know that the other side will have vulnerabilities, and then we'll look at those vulnerabilities.
And I have to say, if I were an asset manager or a wealth management expert, with large investments in one of the countries you have assets on the ground in, getting, I don't like the word disinformation, but getting information direct from, Jack would be much different than hearing that over Twitter, where it could be twisted and turned 4 billion times, or even the media now. So I'm guessing that's probably something you,
I think it's a big challenge. I've had a number of household word asset managers independently say to me, we've always done geopolitical, but it's so complex now.
Yeah.
And while AI is a great asset for how to make a better car or how to do 1,000 things that are technical, the geopolitical is really conventional wisdom on steroids, and conventional wisdom get you in trouble. And that is, they're giving you everything that's been said about something. That doesn't mean that it's accurate. And where they miss the ball is plans and intentions. So if you were looking at today at the Middle East, you would want to know, what is Netanyahu thinking? What is the Ayatollah thinking? Right? What's Russia, China thinking? Right? So in the business world, what I've found, and I'm trying to get into that niche because folks in merchant investments came to me last year, and we talked about this. How do you get this information out to the wealth managers, and in what formats, and what information do you get to the asset managers? But what I found really interesting, and you can start to see this, everyone's talking about human sources. The director, and I've been writing about it. I wrote an article that I'm so pleased of in the Wall Street Journal. It was an op-ed on the attack by Hamas and where was the intelligence failure. And it was in the Hamas, it was looking at Hamas. I would give Israel an A+ on everything else they looked at. Hezbollah, Iran, you can see it today, A+. But conventional wisdom, because what they were looking at was, that's under control. And then out of the blue, the mess that we're looking at it started because we didn't have human coverage where we needed to have it. And today, if you look at Ukraine, we knew the Russians were coming. Did we know how good or how bad, let me underscore this, how bad Russia's army was, that he was bringing out a 1946 army in convoys, and when we were in a drone war, and he thought he was going to walk over. They actually had hotel reservations in Kyiv. We, on the other side, the Americans, that's not me, and one of the books deals very heavily with Russia and the Ukrainians. But we offered Zelensky a ticket in the first few days to get out of there. We'll do covert action and fight them in the hills and the woods. And Zelensky said, no, thanks, I want to tough it out here. And he was right, because here we are over 3 years, and the Russians, they make a little progress here, and then you look at what happened at their Air Force. The Royal Air Force was really smashed by this country that's on its back. So human intelligence, what I did there was a conference out in California I went to last year, and I said, part of the job is to take the uncertainty out of it. You can't get to zero, right? But human intelligence, what the plans and intentions of your adversaries, what's going to happen in, let's say, a foreign country, and what laws are going to be passed, what are the labor unions going to do, your competitors, and today, I mean, right now, everybody's looking at petroleum and the price of petroleum. You better have a good idea of what's at stake right now. And fortunately, there's a couple of companies that like to spend 2 hours a month with me. I don't know why anybody would want to do that. Maybe an hour, maybe. But what we do is we review the situation in the Middle East. And it's
Well, I
not
was sitting.
that they're so heavily invested in the Middle East. It's that what's happening there is going to have a great impact on prices, and not just
Yeah,
petroleum, because petroleum
systemic.
impacts on everything, right?
Yep.
So I think, and again, I'm going to go right to the current director. He now is saying what I've been saying for 20 years. You're underinvested. And I'm saying it publicly. I say it in both books. We were grossly underinvested in human sources. Who doesn't love technology? And I'm not against it. Use everything. I use AI. I use everything I can. But you're really missing the boat if you do not have human infrastructure. It's too hard. People don't want to do it. And then the second side of it is, you know, it's do I want to be associated with collecting intelligence? And that's why a big part of my business is consulting. In other words, you're not running operations. And the other thing that I give comfort to is I was with one of the best law firms in the country as far as criminal behavior is concerned. And, we know exactly the white lines and work with law firms. And you want to be careful when you get into this business. The client doesn't come out in worse shape than when they're in, because you've had amateurs around doing things that Uncle Sam will measure you for an orange suit. So what I'm saying is I think we're in a hot spot, and I'm trying to maximize it on the consulting side in terms of really in-depth cases. But what you talked at the beginning, Xander, is what Merchant came to me and said, Jack, that's all great, but you need to democratize your product. And isn't there a way that you can take all of this and not have to say in such granularity, but can you give the people that are handling money in any capacity a sense of problem areas and things they may not be looking at, right? And it, oh, by the way, 3-1 includes a podcast with yours truly. So, but
Great.
for the sake of the customers, I keep it to 8 minutes, because I've decided that on certain types of newsletters and things like this, people want to get to the bottom line pretty fast. They got busy time. So we've really boiled it down to what I think is, after all, I clear out all the details of who said what to whom. There's some really bottom line material here, and that tries to keep sewing that's the big problem for most of the people I talk to is I read everything. The problem is I read everything, and some of it's repetitive, but the other half is so contradictory, and every piece has spin on it, right? It's either this, it's the left, the right, and what they look for, what I sell is what I sold in CIA. When you walk into CIA, there's etched in the marble on the wall. That's a quote from the Bible, John. You shall know the truth, and it'll set you free. In other words, if you walk to the CIA, the first thing it said, your job, buddy, or what do you say instead of buddy for a female, but Sally. But I mean, the point is, and we're 50% women, by the way, which is a great thing.
Wow.
A lot of talent that was denied the system for many years. But the point is, give me the facts, give me the truth. I'll figure out how to make that investment. You don't have to worry about it. Just give me the facts and I'll be able to deal with it. Now, I think that's, you may not like my unusual sense of humor, but at the end of the day, you're getting it unvarnished, right? This is it.
Yeah. And that's what I appreciate about the 3-in-1. I've read it. I like that it's, you have four points that are concise, clear, short, but I know it's coming from you guys, so it's good intel. And let's go into one of those. I guess our listeners would probably really want to hear after what was it yesterday, that with the hypersonic strikes going on in Tehran and Israel. You had a short little blib on the June 13th attack. Would love to hear, what your thoughts are on the whole issue, what your thoughts are longer term on maybe oil prices or equity prices, or just systemic issues that you might see as an issue. I read a lot too, and I've read things saying that we're going to go to World War III, and then there's other articles saying, that really the proxy powers have been tarnished and they're kind of weak right now, and that China may not want to get in, Russia may not want to get in. So I'd love to hear just kind of your thoughts as it is today on the 16th of June, 2025, and just, where your head is right now today.
So if you jump in the middle of an information pile, you're going to drown. All right. If you jump in a pool, let me put it that way. So the issue for clients, and this is what I'm on the consulting side, we're going to do 3+1 simultaneously, is you really have to track things for a while.
Right.
In other words, you call in the middle of the night and say, "We need to cover X." If you haven't been covering it, it takes you a while to get going, right? So I have networks that, God's been good to me, that clients want to continue the work. So I have sources on the ground in every place where, we think it's relevant. We work literally everywhere, but not every place is a hot button place. And at some point we'll talk about black swans. There's something going to pop up in the Antarctic or something, which I'm not covering very well. I missed that one. I better get moving down there. So, but the point is, you build up networks of people. So if you're looking at the Middle East today, one of the first things to do is avoid that conventional wisdom. Make sure you're, yes, read everything, but allow that the New York Times and the Atlantic and the Washington Post and the Indian Daily, much of it may be repetitive, right? And so a big voice could really carry far. So you have to question it. Now, all those papers are very professional, and they're professional writers. But what I'm saying is you have to test some of the suppositions with on the ground. So one of the things that's really interesting, I say to people that are interested, make sure, why don't you listen to what the other side of the table is saying, right? So if you listen to Netanyahu, he was telling us what he wanted to do.
Yep.
Ayatollah was telling us what they wanted to do. Putin was telling us what they wanted to do. And we always sit back and say, well, no, that can't be, because in graduate school, when I looked at the course, these are all these other considerations. Right? Well, that's fine, but that's not what Putin wants to do. So I think you have to go back to basic principles. And the Iranians want to destroy Israel and remove us from that area. On the Israeli side, when you listen to Netanyahu, he has the alternative view, which is, I'm going to destroy Israel because it's an existential threat, right? So you have two polar groups here. Then it starts, you hear, well, how is this going to play out? And the Hamas attacked Israel brutally, in ways that required a massive response. And I was very strong in supporting, pushing back hard. But because the Israelis weren't covering, it took a while to get their grip around the Gaza, and it's still a major problem for them, but not from a military point of view, but how you extricate yourself in a way that makes sense. But what he said at the time is, listen, these people are being supported by Iran, Hezbollah, Houthis. I'm going after them all. I'm not going to let my country. So, well, unfortunately, the others weren't listening as carefully, because he is spending the last 15 years planning an attack against Hezbollah, right? Identifying exactly where everybody was, blowing up their leadership, going in and basically decapitating. It may be dramatic, but Hezbollah is not the threat that it was before Hamas moved in. Syria, huge challenge, right? And it was the proxy for getting the support to Lebanon. So what happened there? You have I'm not saying it was inspired by Israel, it wasn't, but we're taking a maximum advantage of it today. Now, Syria is on the other side of the fence with us. And so, I think this is really important. The Houthis are difficult. I mean, I forgot what movie I was watching, but it was, how the Houthis were fighting back in 100 years ago, and it's out of caves, right?
Yeah.
So we bring in a big aircraft carrier and they're fighting out of caves, but guess what? They now have all these drones and missiles asymmetrical. So even though it's really primitive, it can be a real headache for everybody. But frankly, they're not going to be able to replace the Hezbollah in Lebanon. And I think the Iranians are sitting there because they're members of the IRGC, their military, and they thought they could do better, right? They knew Israel was formidable. They had no idea that they were going to get two black eyes and a broken kneecap. So what I'm saying is, Iran has been pushing in this area, and it came to a boiling point. Hamas jumped out ahead of time and made the inevitable happen. But we're in a tricky place, and that is the one of the main problems for the world beyond Israel is an Iran with the nuclear weapons is highly problematic. That's not the right word. So
Yeah.
I've been saying to anyone that listens to me, based on my field sources, they're never going to have a nuclear weapon. I wish the Iranians listened to me. If you know you're not going to have one, you can pretend you're going to have one and then cut a really good deal, right? And right now, big question is if they get smashed the way they are, does that end the nuclear program or does it stimulate to dig deeper than Fordo? So the point now is what type of deal? Now, the administration, the Trump administration, was trying to negotiate a deal. And I know there were a lot of skeptics. Certainly, the last deal left much to be desired. But I thought the moment was right. I thought the Iranians were starting to get the message, and that there might have been an opportunity to get peace in the areas, temporary as it may be. I think the world needs peace in Ukraine, Russia. I think it needs peace in the Middle East. And with those major objectives, peace is not permanent here, but I think we need a break. So I thought the administration was on the right path. I thought it was on the wrong path when it was trying to get a ceasefire when Netanyahu said, I'm not taking a ceasefire. I'm not done. I mean, we've got to finish this, so why go out there 7 times? So I thought there was a prospect for it. But what was not surprising, because Netanyahu went to Washington and said, I think I have to go alone. And Trump said, you want to go alone then, but I wish you didn't. So now you have a really complicated situation. Iran is flat on its back. It's sending out all types of messages. I think it's time to talk, right? And Netanyahu is sitting there. Well, I'm a hair away from finishing this at Fordo, the most important nuclear site, and the one that is buried a quarter of a kilometer below the ground or something. And so, but we can't finish that without the B-2s and the buster bombs that are the 30-pound type.
Yep.
So this is tricky. Does the United States get in and provide it? Do we become a target for the Iranians? Do we finish, help the Israelis finish off the job? So this is where, as I said, I think you're not going to resolve this sitting in an ivory tower. You really need to be plugged in. So what I can do is tell you where it is minute to minute, may be a little grandiose, but in a timely fashion, day by day. But some of these decisions are being made day by day. I think the President of the United States is being pressured from every angle on whether to do something or not do something. It's really a tough call. And Netanyahu, I think, is in the easiest position, which is he wants to get this done. And the Iranians are still struggling. Well, we're really getting creamed here. We need a ceasefire, but we can't look so weak or our country will fall apart and the world will think and we have to get even. But so I think there is probably, I don't want to put percentages on it. I think we're going to see war fighting for another several days, right? Because they're not finished. But if I take it as face value that the Israelis really need us to do the the Fordo nuclear site. That we're either going to do that in the next agree to that in the next few days, or we're going to push as hard as we can to get a ceasefire, but on terms that the Iranians were not going to even consider.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
it's all at play. I really should summarize this in a clearer way, other than to say everything is, even by the players, even when you have human sources on the ground. If the players are still trying to work the problem, that's the news. They're still trying to work the problem, which means you better not bet one way or the other too much, right? So I
Yeah.
don't know whether I muddied the water here, Xander. Maybe you can help me sort out whether I was cogent enough.
No, I think
If another
what you said.
question clarifies it.
No, I think what you said was spot on. I mean, if you read the Wall Street Journal this morning, stocks rallied today because that article did mention that there was going to probably some type of resolution discussion in the works. And I completely agree with you. I don't think it's going to end tomorrow. But I think both players are in flux right now and making kind of impulsive decisions, or don't really know where to go at this
You
point.
tell me, but one of the things that I'm picking up in my relationship with asset managers and wealth managers, is this sense that things are happening so fast that the herd instinct, augmented by AI, is, oh, someone said there might be a ceasefire. Good, buy.
Yeah.
Oh, that fell apart. Sell. I mean, and they're moving this by, I don't even say by minutes, microseconds, right?
Nanoseconds.
So
Yep.
what I'm saying is sometimes you got to step back and don't, you got to watch the herd mentality, because I'm saying that there may be a ceasefire. I would say, well, it's just as likely that Netanyahu's going to figure out another way to blow up Fordo. In other words, it wasn't meant, if I were making a comment, said, listen, don't buy or sell just because you think there's a ceasefire, but be mindful that this is the case. What is more important is to watch, which I'm doing, is what are they targeting, right?
Yeah.
Are they targeted? Have they closed the Strait of Hormuz? Are they hitting the island, Karg Island? In other words, right now they're hitting refineries, and they're trying to figure out among themselves how far they go and what happens if they take out the oil, because every country in the Middle East is going to be affected by it, including Iran and Israel. So there's a lot at play. But I think one of the good things sometimes is when all the players know what the other player is saying, you have a better chance of coming to a conclusion. So I think if you listen carefully, I think you hear what Netanyahu's saying, you hear what the Ayatollah is saying, and you hear what President Trump's saying, and you try and find out, hey, is there a deal here? Is there a way to make this work? And I'm saying there's more of a prospect, right? I didn't say there's a good prospect. I said more of a prospect than that. But right now, the war fighting has to go on for a few more days. I mean, you have to, what they're doing now is making sure that all of the things that could hurt them, hurt the Israelis, they're taking care of. But it is a real conundrum, because they will not have completed their mission if they don't take out the Fordo facility. If they don't do that, it's like, okay, you got the biggest thing going. Now they're going to double the speed. So where are we?
Yeah.
And where does the president want to be? Wow, this would finish them off. But when you open that genie and it comes out of the box, I almost entitled the book, one of the books, All It Takes is a Spark. Because I can't tell you on this action side how many people came into my office from a foreign government or even from a state or somewhere else and said, Jack, if we just light a match and start the fire, it'll all take care of itself. And I said, well, I don't know a weatherman that I'm going to have confidence that the wind's not going to blow the other way. No, I threw them out of the office because in order to have a regime change, which is a very popular slogan today, you just don't start it and say, well, let's hope it all works out, right? You just can't run that way. I mean, you can, and just, you have to pray a lot, or consider yourself a riverboat gambler. I mean, that's acceptable on the stock market as well, either of those. So, uh, my point is, there's a lot of uncertainty, right? And the markets are going to react to it. So I think the markets, again, please don't invest on the basis of me. Now hire me and I can give you information to help you do it. But this is still a volatile situation. I have a slight degree of optimism because it's in my nature that wars can't go on forever. That this thing has an end. It's not a year from now, right? And so it will end. What's a little unclear. Same with Russia and Ukraine. I thought we were coming to an end, but Putin thought he had better negotiating space than I thought he had. So, but I think both of these somehow are resolved. But I thought there was a better prospect 2 or 3 months ago that we could have a little more peace in the Middle East and Russia. And then today, a little more pessimistic, short term. Long term, I think these things just wear themselves out. After a while, everyone's so exhausted they have to go to their corner.
Yep, yep. Trees don't grow to the sky, as they say with stocks. So, and the stock market likes certainty. So it's good to hear that. Well, Jack, I'll definitely be
in
reading.
mid-career. In
What's
mid-career,
that?
I said in mid-career, they give you a test. The test was how to match up your career. A little late in the game, midway through, to say, well, let's test and see what you really would be better at, right? So, well, I thought, well, maybe I'll be a general. I was a little proud of myself, so I thought I'd be a general, not a sergeant, right? Now, by the way, I think I'd be a better general. Sergeant, I'd fail, but because that's a different talent pool. But I thought, well, maybe a lawyer, maybe I could do that. And certainly, some other things. Well, I came back investment banker, and I said, what the hell's an investment banker? Is that the guy down at my local branch? I mean, that checks my check? No, an investment banker is what Xander, you do and all of your clients do, and that is, it is a really the interesting thing goes back to that lifeguard. I want to end where I began. It's a risk management issue. When the whistle blows, where do you go? And how do you evaluate? Are you alert every day, every moment? So I do think there was an aspect of the personality of risk management. And most of the ones I know are not accountants. They don't have advanced degrees in accounting, but they know people. They know they have instincts about what motivates people and how things move. And they're students of, if you take Warren Buffett in the extreme, they're really students of the subject matter. And that gets to research, it gets to, the getting information and the power of information. So I want to come back to it. Now I'm thinking a little late, but at least I hang out with some of the investment bankers.
Well, it's pretty fascinating. Asset managers, investment bankers. There's, I think I heard a podcast with you talking about the models and schools that they teach for financial models, and how they always get disrupted. But I think what models do is they do take out a human element, and there is a whole, school of investment philosophy and economics that's human based emotional behavioral investing, and how you avoid pitfalls, not only trade into them. So I think I could see your interest in that.
So I would just end on this kind of note, and that is, a lot of the people I know in the wealth management and in the financial investment area would make be good in the intelligence business on the covert action part. They might not be so good on the espionage, but on the action part, there are a lot of really good instincts there.
I think I'd stick out. I'm a little too tall for
well, I'm 6 foot. Wait, do you have time for a story on being tall in the spine?
Yeah, I would love it.
So you're already, but I'm 6'5". So when
I'm 6'6".
So when I came out of training, well, you are a little too tall. I'm all right, but you're a little too tall. But so I came out of training, and I've been talking to the Russia division because, well, that's where the action is. It really isn't, because if you go to Russia, they're watching you 24/7. So you're someone that has to be a little dark man who sneaks around and rolls out of a car and that sort of stuff, right? So, but I didn't know, and I thought, well, so I went to my counselor, and he said, "Oh, you're too tall. You can't go to Russia." And I went, well, that's kind of the first time I ran into prejudice directly, but okay. So he took me over to Latin America, and next thing you know, I'm on the Chile desk. Next thing I'm in Chile with the government being overthrown, and I'm standing to myself thinking, wait a minute, why am I too tall for Russia, but I'm not too tall for Chile, right? And the truth of the matter is, spying, you're supposed to be invisible, right? You're not supposed to do something. But I think what he sensed in me was the action part. And that's what I think he was really saying, because Latin America was full of action. Russia was a threat, but it wasn't, we weren't doing, we were fighting the Russians in Chile, we were fighting them in Africa and in Southeast Asia. But so the point is, no, you would qualify, but I'd have to show you a few, this rolling out of a car thing. It hurts a little.
I bet. I bet. Well, Jack, I really appreciate your time today. I don't want to take too much more of your time, and I definitely am a subscriber to the 3+1. I think it's a great place to get information, and I'd love to have you back on it at some point. But for our subscribers at FinLink, they can find how to get a hold of you guys in the description of this video. So, I'd love for them to send you any questions they might have, and I definitely look forward to having you on again so we can go into some more depth. I know, this ends it short. I could be on with you for 2 days if we needed to. So,
well, it's a pleasure being on, and FinLink is a great part of what we're trying to do together. So, and I enjoyed your questions, and I hope the audience did as much. So, but I am
sure
reachable, and intelligence, information is a key to really good investment, in my view.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Well, thanks so much, Jack. We'll talk soon, and try to get another one of these on the calendar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.